Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Caroline, how's it going today?
I'm doing well, Bryce. I have to say, I was momentarily distracted. I almost forgot my line because it looks like you might have some new art hanging on the walls behind you.
I wouldn't say new. Like typically when we record, we've talked about this before, we do this remotely. We can see each other. Most of the time when I'm recording, I'm actually at my like dining room table.
Oh,
Today I'm actually Cheryl's getting ready for work, so I'm in our spare bedroom, or as I call it, like my video game room. So yeah, I've got a Super Mario Brothers thing up behind me. So that's what you're seeing.
very
Nobody
nice.
else is seeing it.
Yeah,
People listening, but
as I was saying it, I realized, Caroline, this is not a podcast conversation, but I liked it. So
nice.
yeah, I'm glad to get this kind of glimpse into your world.
I'll maybe for future recordings just try and do it in a different area of my place. Then it's just to
Mm,
kind of throw you off a little bit.
yeah. Yeah. I will be thrown. I can promise you that.
Caroline, I'm so excited for today's episode though, because this is a topic that it's been on our list of episode topics for like quite a while.
Yeah.
And today, of course, we're talking about the best and the worst endings. This is going to be the TV edition though. Like
Yes.
we originally, when we kind of pitched this idea to ourselves and other staff member, it's like, hey, send us like your best and worst picks, and we got a bunch in, but most
Yeah.
of them ended up being, not surprisingly, TV. We're at that time of the year where a lot of finales are running and everything, and like the endings, pretty much like with anything, can really make or break like a TV show or book or movie, right?
Absolutely. And I think that I am really looking forward to talking about all of the different formats and media that we're excited to talk about. But when I sat down and started crafting out the questions for today and all of the shows that I specifically wanted to make sure we hit, I messaged you, Bryce, and was like, I think we gotta break this up. Let's just narrow in on TV. So I think it's interesting. There's absolutely something about TV as a something you watch over time in your house that I there's just something intimate about it, and people get really involved, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our guests today their thoughts on TV shows.
Absolutely. Yes. We have a couple of great guests joining us today. Like most of these episodes, we'll do a call out to EPL staff and internally and be like, hey, give us your picks, or if you want to come on this episode. And we had a couple staff members who were like very active in that forum and were like giving some pretty good opinions on what some of their favorite endings are. So first of all, we want to welcome to the show for the very first time. We love having first time guests here on Overdue Finds. He's a librarian at White Mud Crossing. Ben Ehlers. Ben, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi, thanks for having me, Bryce. It's first time on the show. You had invited me on a few years ago, but I was in the middle of library school and had no brain cells left for witty banter. So I politely excused myself from your invitation. But things are better now. I've got a cup of coffee and no master's programs to worry about. So things are better.
It's funny because when we first started the podcast, you were working at Enterprise Square.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember so many times in the morning, I'd be like, how do I set this up? And he'd come in and help me set up microphones or the computer or whatever. So, yeah, Ben's an unsung hero of Overdue Finds in those early days.
Yeah, I think, my work really contributed to it because it seems like a well-oiled machine right now. So
we try to be. And also joining us today, this is actually going to be her second time on the show. And Caroline had to look this up. And last time our guest was on the show was episode number 54. It was our EPL from Home online resources. It was one of our very first pandemic episodes. So if you go back around that 50 mark, you'll see them. Welcome to the show from our collections department, Bethany Arsenault. Bethany, welcome back to Overdue Finds. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me back. Very excited.
That was quite a while ago. It was 2 years ago. The world's changed just a little bit in those last 2 years, I would
Just
say.
a bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
just a bit.
So you both kind of gave us online some great kind of picks, and Bethany in particular, you've got a take on Seinfeld here that I'm quite excited to hear about later on in the show. But Caroline, before we get to all that stuff,
Yes.
At the end of each episode, we always ask, let listeners know, hey, if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us.
Yeah.
Or reach us on social media, and we love getting those emails. And we actually got one the other week, right?
We did. Overdue Finds listener Rob reached out to us after the Godfather episode with some podcast recommendations about behind the scenes making of movies, including the podcast Blockbuster, which in its second season devotes 10 episodes to the production of Titanic. Which was the movie that I said I would like to watch. And unrelated to Rob's email, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. The also having a cultural moment. I think was it at Coachella? Was that the music festival? Anyway, Shania Twain appearing on the main stage in a duet. Shania Twain was my K-pop pick, so I think I'm onto something. I clearly have my finger on some kind of pulse. Anyway, back to Rob. Thank you, Rob. We love getting recommendations and hearing what people are enjoying, or what they think we might enjoy. And you can share with us by emailing podcast@epl.ca.
Yeah, we've gotten quite a few of these emails over the years, and I love that people share with us as well. They're like, hey, love the episode. Hey, we think that you will like this other podcast or this other movie or book. So yeah, we absolutely love our listeners and love getting those recommendations from them. All right, so overdue picks time. Bethany, I'm going to start with you. What's something that you've been enjoying lately?
So I'm just pulling it up here on my trusty Libby app. Shout out Libby. I'm a huge ebook fan, fitting given that I work with the digital collection. And a book that I just recently took out is the Animal Crossing New Horizon Residence Handbook. And I highly recommend this ebook if you're an Animal Crossing fan. Basically, what it does is it gives you all kinds of really great ideas and tips and tricks to build your Animal Crossing island. Gives you all kinds of different recipes, different templates and stuff that can help you, build houses and clothing and anything you need to just really make your island super cool. So big fan of this new book. It was on order for a long time, and then we got it in. Soon as I saw that it was on order, I put it on hold and was super pumped as soon as I came in. So yeah, I definitely recommend it if you are an Animal Crossing fan.
Now, when you say recipes in there, because I've never played Animal Crossing, so do you mean is there stuff in the game that you get to make, or is this like real life recipe?
It's stuff in the game that you make. So it teaches you you have to make your house, you have to make everything from scratch. So it gives you everything you need to make. If you're building your house, for example, you need to make bed, your tables, your chairs, everything you need to make your house. You can make anything in Animal Crossing. Anything that you can dream, you can build. So this handbook is really great. It's the unofficial guide, just throwing that out there. But yeah, it has lots of really cool ideas and tips and tricks in it.
Ben, how about you? Is there something you've been enjoying lately?
Yeah, so I'm now officially into the third year of my 2020 New Year's resolution to read more fiction. Full disclosure, I'm actually a very bad librarian when it comes to any sort of fiction. So a few years ago, I decided it was time to change that. So being incapable of reading everything, I decided I would just focus on sci-fi and fantasy. So that's all I read. for pleasure. Nonfiction, totally different ballgame. But recently I just wrapped up This Is How You Lose the Time War by Amal, I'm going to mispronounce this, El Motar and Max Gladstone. It's a very short read. It's more like a novella. But it's essentially a series of love letters between two agents on opposite sides of an interdimensional war to control the time stream. Now, what I love about this is it sounds super complicated, but what I love about great science fiction is when they just kind of take all the technological MacGuffins and they just kind of sweep it to the side. And it's the air the characters breathe, it's the backdrop, but they don't dwell on it. And instead, you're left with this vehicle for a deeper reflection on our shared human experience. And This Is How You Do the Time War does it really well. They paint a moving picture of a blossoming, possibly doomed friendship between these two agents that are constantly crossing paths like ships in the night at these disparate points in the space-time continuum. And this friendship emerges in that context, and it's uncompromisingly weird and beautiful and fun. And it's a great read. So if you like literary fiction and you're thinking, sci-fi, that's for nerds, give this one a shot, because it's like way more literary fiction than it is sci-fi, but it has enough to keep everybody happy. It's a great book.
Yeah, that sounds fun. Now, is it told like via just a series of like messages back to each other, or is it just kind of standard, I guess, narrative fiction?
No, it's I had to look this word up. It's apostolic fiction, which is to say a series of letters between two characters. And so the format is very predictable once you get into the ebb and flow of it, where there'll be a letter written from one of the characters who's just called Red. And she'll write a letter to the other agent, which is Blue. And it'll be like, Dear Blue. And it'll go through with like all these taunts, like, you suck and we're going to win, blah, blah, blah. You're a loser. See you later. And then the next chapter will set up the time era in which the kind of action is happening, which usually centers around the other character discovering this letter in some weird place, because they're not just letters. They'll be in like encoded in DNA or read in tea leaves from a monk's discarded beverage in the morning or something. And then it'll bounce back to the next letter and then the next scene, and just kind of has this tick-tock back and forth that ratchets up in complexity and emotional depth. It's really good.
That sounds like a really fun read, actually. Caroline, how about you?
Recently, an actor, Fred Ward, passed away, and when he died, there was one movie that everyone was remembering his amazing performance in, and that movie is Tremors. And I had never seen Tremors and was wondering what this was all about. So I sat down, I watched Tremors starring Fred Ward and Kevin Bacon. It was so good. I had the best time watching it. Such a good movie.
You left out Reba McEntire's also
I
in
did
it.
leave out Reba McEntire because like that just would go on this whole side trip. Michael Gross is also in it. Just it's funny. It's tense. You're rooting for them. You're grossed out with these so the plot basically is that there are these sandworm monsters. There's 3 of them. That's a really big deal because you have to keep track of how many they've killed at various points, and they are attacking this rural desert outpost town where these characters live, and all the ways out of town are cut off. They have to stay and fight these sandworm monsters, but I was not expecting to enjoy this movie as much as I did, for sure.
Oh, Caroline, I'm so happy to hear that you enjoyed. You got to, first of all, watch Tremors for the first time and enjoy it so much. That makes me so happy because, I probably saw that movie at way too young of an age. But like, that was like I've talked about this on the show before. Like growing up in the 80s, we occasionally would get these Super Channel free preview weekends. That was one that I would like recorded on VHS and like watched over and over and over again. And yeah, you described it perfectly. The movie's funny, it's tense.
There's also a seismologist. I forgot like that like love kind of subplot, but it's really really mainly about survival.
There's like an ungodly amount of Tremors direct-to-video sequels. There's like, I don't know, 6 or 7 of them. And Michael Gross is in every single one of them.
I am not surprised at all about that, but so far I've just seen the one, yeah, I was really glad I did. Fred Ward, honestly, the touchstone that I had for him, he plays Reese Witherspoon's father in Sweet Home Alabama, and so that was when I saw it, I'm like, oh, it's that guy, but then all of these tributes was like Tremors and his other movies as well. But yeah, if you thought Tremors maybe isn't for you, I'm here to tell you, give it another look.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever talked to somebody who said that they didn't like that movie. Like that's a movie you can bring up to like, oh wait, Bethany, you don't like it?
You're like bringing up some real childhood trauma right now. I also watched it like maybe a little too young, to the point where I watched it at a friend's house, and then my mom had to come and get me and carry me home because I refused to touch the ground.
Yeah, because it would vibrate and then it would let the snake monster or worm monsters know where
we were. Yeah, exactly. And so there was like a point in time where like I would not touch the ground and my mom had to carry me various places. It's a scary movie for a child, for like a certain age group. Definitely.
Yeah, but I think like watching it for the first time much older than you were, I think it is scary. Like you're watching it and you're kind of like, what would I do in this situation? Because there are definitely points where it looks like there's just no way they can possibly win or get around it. And then you get into the whole thing around like, well, can an animal really be a villain, or are they just being animals on there? Anyway, lots to consider with Tremors. So I can save those thoughts for our worm monster episode whenever that comes up.
That's right. We'll have a Dune and Beetlejuice tie-in. We got lots there to cover on underground worms.
Yes. So, Bryce, what have you been enjoying?
Yeah, so I actually have a book pick this week. I don't normally have a lot of book picks on here, but yeah, so I was recently just looking around kind of at some different book covers, and there was a title that caught my eye, and the book is called Nothing But a Good Time, The Uncensored History of 80s Hard Rock Explosion. It's by Tom Bajor and Richard Beinstock. So I've talked about on the show, like I love my dad rock. And one of the genres of this dad rock is definitely kind of like hair metal from the 80s. There's kind of this hair metal explosion that really kind of kicked off in 1979, I would say. So this book is awesome because if you're a fan of kind of those hair metal bands from the 80s, like Motley Crue or Poison, or even Van Halen or Guns N' Roses, you're absolutely going to love this book. And even if you're not a fan, I think what you would enjoy about this book is kind of reading about all these like 80s escapades. The book is full of these like tales of debauchery of these 80s rock bands. And, the book really starts off with kind of the forming of bands like kind of like Van Halen and Motley Crue in the early 80s and how they came up, and they've kind of like helped kind of rejuvenate rock, I guess. And because at the time, the book talks about this, how like everything in the early 80s was about new wave. And a lot of record labels weren't really interested at all in kind of signing these rock bands. But, Van Halen came along and everything kind of seemed to change over the course of a couple of years. So what's neat about this book, too, is the book really is a series of anecdotes, and it's told by kind of the people in these bands, along with record executives and concert promoters. So it basically, like, you look at the page and it's almost like all these like little short interviews that you'll see. So Caroline, it kind of almost sounds like it's a little bit like Daisy Jones and the Six in a way.
I was just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, and for any of you out there, this is a kind of favorite rock band book of mine. So Motley Crue's The Dirt, it's the exact same format as that. So it's, if you like kind of your hair metal and your tales of behind the scenes rock and roll debauchery, I think you'll enjoy this book. This is a fun one. Today, of course, we're talking about TV's best and worst endings. And I think, Caroline, we kind of have to do our
spoiler alert
warning. I think we're gonna do our best here not to like completely ruin any endings at all.
Are we?
So here's what I recommend. We promote this at the end of every single episode. We have a list of items that we talk about on this episode. In that list, you will see what we talk about, and they're all in order from where kind of for when we talk about it. So if you don't want to hear us talk about the ending of Seinfeld, you've been avoiding it, or the ending to like How I Met Your Mother, kind of which areas to kind of skip over. So just a word of warning there. I mean, I think, most of the shows that we're going to be talking about today are fairly well known and people have probably had a chance to see them over the years. But, if you're worried, please take a look at that show notes and you'll see the list of all the shows that we kind of reference in today's episode. But I'm really looking forward to talking about some of these endings. But before we get to it, though, I have to ask, Ben, I'm going to start with you. What do you think are some of the elements of a good ending?
So, yeah, I've been doing some thinking about this. And to me, a good ending needs to be kind of internally consistent with where the story started, right? Like, you've got the ending point and you should be able to look back and be like, oh yeah, that was the journey that we were on together. And now I know how we got here. And this is where I run into one of my least favorite things about endings, the Deus Ex Machina trope. It's a writing convention where it turns out that at the end it was all just a dream, or I've suddenly been rescued by a force utterly outside the context of this narrative. These endings can just feel like a bait and switch, like I'm sure you can think of some shows that have elements of that, right?
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and I think that journey piece, there's a way to do an ending that can have a twist without completely pulling the rug out and invalidating what's come before. And I was thinking a lot about this because it might be one of the most famous examples. I know it's not a TV show, but The Wizard of Oz ends with, "It was all a dream." And it's still okay because it doesn't really change what happened. It it impacts it, but you can still follow through the story and get to that endpoint, versus something like Saint Elsewhere's controversial Snow Globe finale, where it turned out, oh, all of these people have just been characters in a child's imagination, and this never happened. Or the Roseanne finale, where it's like, oh, by the way, this was a story, but I mixed everything up and it didn't really happen this way. It causes you to look back in a way that is not satisfying to that journey. And Ben, thinking about the start and the end, a lot of these, I watched a lot of like first episodes and then last episodes, and there were definitely more pilot callbacks to things than I thought there might be.
you bring up the dream piece, and the first thing I thought of right away was, and this is going to age me, and maybe some of our older listeners will remember this, the ending to Newhart.
I was just thinking of that one, the golf
yeah.
ball.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so if you haven't seen it, like Newhart ran in like the 80s. So I think it ran from like, I don't know, 82 to 90, I believe. And yeah, for those who haven't seen it, Bob Newhart plays this author who decides to move to Vermont and open up an inn. Now, it's also important to know that Bob Newhart also starred in another successful sitcom in the 70s called The Bob Newhart Show. And he played a psychologist named Dr. Bob Hartley. So in Newhart, Bob Newhart's character gets hit by a golf ball and he wakes up, and it's in the bedroom of his character from the Bob Newhart Show. And where he's wakes up as this Dr. Bob Hartley, and he says to his wife that he had this weird dream that he was an innkeeper in Vermont. So it's probably one of the most famous ever series finales, if you kind of look up lists and everything. But that's a perfect example of one where it's like, hey, those 8 seasons you just watched, they were all a dream.
But it still kind of works because it, I don't know, there's some kind of Bob Newhart magic, I think.
Bob Newhart can get away with it.
Bethany, what do you think?
Well, I was just thinking, like with the Roseanne finale, there was a lot of criticism about that finale. A lot of fans were really upset about it, and I think the question you ask, what do you think are the elements of a good ending versus what do fans want to see in a good ending? I think those are two different questions, and I think it kind of hits at like what happened with the Roseanne ending. Of what fans wanted to see happen with Roseanne is things finally started to turn around for that family. Like they were living in poverty for a long time, and they, finally were, getting out of poverty, and things were looking up for them, and things were great, and, blah, blah, blah. And then turns out it wasn't true, and they were right back where, right back where they started. And I think that's why a lot of fans were upset with that ending. And so I think what fans are looking for in an ending is kind of that like neat bow that like everything's going to be okay, and we're going to end the show, and we're all going to be happy, and everything's going to be great. And I think like that's part of what we want to see the show end, or how we want to see the show end. I think anyways, at least that's how like my knee jerk reaction to a lot of finales tends to be. And then looking back, like once I get some distance from the finale and I see like, oh, actually maybe that finale that I didn't like initially, maybe it's actually a lot better than I expected. And I say that from rewatching a lot of finales like you, Caroline. I rewatched a lot of pilots and finales this past weekend to prepare. And, at one point I was like, why did we all hate the Game of Thrones finale? I can't remember. Like, so yeah, I think that's kind of, I mean, it brought up so many feelings, and I feel like there could be so much. I feel like you could write a dissertation on like finales in general, and fan reaction to finales.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was thinking when I looked through a lot of these the finale takes a lot of heat, but it's just one episode. And I think that thinking of Game of Thrones, Roseanne, a lot of other examples, I'm going to throw X-Files in here. It's rarely just about the finale episode. It's what's leading up to it too. And I think it's that going back to what Ben was talking about, that journey piece around, is this true to what this show is, or to who these characters are? And I kind of ended up thinking of a finale being able to introduce certainty and uncertainty, and the degrees to which one was present really did depend on what the show was and how the characters did it. A lot of finales have some combination of a wedding, a baby, selling the house, moving away, taking a new job, or interestingly, being on trial, which comes up in a number of shows. And I think that there are the certainty ones, the ones that kind of like formalize, crystallize what's happening, the wedding, the relationship, somebody makes a decision, versus the uncertainty ones. I'm moving away. I'm going on this new journey, maybe a spin-off potential type thing. But having that degree of like the journey is still continuing, but I like where it left off. I think finding the right balance for the particular series is what really the role of the finale is.
Yeah, some shows do that really well. Like just kind of in preparing for this, I saw a lot of basically universal acclaim for the ending to Star Trek: The Next Generation, which again draws into that uncertainty element and has the main character, Captain Jean-Luc Picard, on trial by this, super intelligent, all omnipresent being, and
just as he was in the pilot.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
So it comes full circle.
Yeah, that's the other thing that's kind of cool too about some endings is like when they are like almost like reward their audience, like, hey, we know you've been along with us for the journey. Remember this from the pilot, or remember this character. They're actually very important for this reason. And yeah, it's I do like when finales do that.
We like that bookend structure, like that symmetry of like, this is the model or this is the format of the pilot and this is the format of the finale. And I think it feels final, like it feels like it's actually bringing things to a close.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite ways to find a new show is just wait until it's done and then just see the reviews on the final episode. And if everybody's like, yeah, that was really great, and I'm like, okay, now I'm going to watch this. So, which was how I found Dark, which I think we'll mention a little bit later. So
yeah. So one of the shows that came up when we put this question to staff was Battlestar Galactica. Ben, what were your thoughts on the ending to Battlestar Galactica?
So, Battlestar Galactica. If you haven't seen it, the short version of the story is that humanity created Cylons, which are basically human-like robots, which you can't distinguish from real humans, but they weren't treated like real humans. So the first thing they do at the very start of the series is exterminate all of humanity, quite successfully. Luckily, the eponymous Battlestar Galactica is a military ship that's fully crewed on its kind of swan song voyage to be decommissioned. And it was off-world at the time all the nukes dropped, so their crew, hey, they survive. And they immediately strike out for a mythological safe planet known as Earth, where they can hide from the evil Cylons and start over. So I'm really ambivalent about Battlestar Galactica. And my gut instinct was, when I first watched it, I actually hated it. I did not like the ending. But I had a chance to talk over with a colleague of mine at work, and he kind of got me to change my thinking on a little bit. So the show promises sci-fi. It has rules, an internal logic that can be used to explain everything that happens in the show until you get to the very final arc where it just goes completely off the rails with a huge amount of Deus Ex Machina. Like, so many questions in the show just get hand waved away with something God's plan, which as a rational sci-fi fan leaves me with a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. But as much as I want to hate the ending, I can't, because when you look back at the arc of the show, it was completely consistent with what it was trying to tell you throughout. It was very well telegraphed. So for context, one of the main characters, Gaius Baltar, who's this kind of cowardly, is he a villain, is he not a villain, ambiguous character, has this constant companion in the form of a hallucination of one of the Cylons. She's omnipresent, constantly reminding him that she's an angel of God sent to protect him. Now, as a viewer, through the sci-fi lens, you're inclined to say, well, no, he's just delusional, he's a narcissist, he's kind of a jerk, and this kind of explains and fits into all that. And the premise of the show is, again, science, and everything has a rational explanation. And then you get to the ending, and it turns out that she was telling the truth, that yes, she actually is divine, and yes, there's a huge amount of Deus Ex Machina. Like, one character is literally resurrected from the dead by the supernatural entity worshipped by the robots. Like, it's gods in the machine all the way down. But then when you look back, it's very consistent, and so really it calls into
We told
question-
you this whole time.
yeah. It's like, see? And so, like, that's my fault as a viewer for not taking these characters at their face value. So, like, the writers made sure that they really tried to commit to the bit, and in the end, I have to respect that. So it's polarizing. Some people still really hate it. Some people have made peace with it, like I have. Apparently, it may or may not get rebooted in the near future, so we might get to have this conversation again, which I think is where the series left us. Everything that has happened will happen again. So say we all.
So did it kind of make you want to go back and like rewatch the whole series again?
We have an informal rule in our house where we never rewatch anything. So
Oh, interesting.
but I might make an exception for this one. It's been long enough, and the fun part is now my daughter is she's like 15, so we can actually like go back and rewatch some of this stuff. So like I rewatched Stranger Things with her now that she's old enough to watch it with us, and so some of these things are a lot of fun to revisit. So we might have to revisit that rule and tweak some things.
That rule, I have to say, that rule got quite a reaction from the panel here.
Oh, I don't think that rule would fly in my house at all. Like, it's we rewatch like we'll watch Bob's Burgers, we'll watch the whole series, and then like once we get caught up with it, it's like back to pilot episode. We're starting that thing again. So yeah, I'm a big fan of rewatching stuff. Yeah,
But there is so much,
There is.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Bethany, have you gone back and rewatched shows?
Like, Ben, you just blew my mind. I think I'm on my like 50th rewatch of Community.
Oh, yeah.
Community is my favorite TV show of all time, and I put it on as like my feel good end of the day. I'm going to bed in 20 minutes, so throw on an episode of Community. That's just kind of how I end my day. So I am not afraid to rewatch anything. And in fact, it's kind of, I would prefer to rewatch things than watch something new.
Community is an interesting, just while we're talking about endings.
It's not over.
Well, Community, but thinking of like, you get into like the business of television, and it as a show had like multiple potential finales that ended up not being the finales, and kind of how that impacts the storytelling, because like an ending is really just where you stop paying attention to it. In terms of thinking about like the life of the characters itself, and a lot of these things, we're finding this in reboots too, this idea of coming back to a show 15, 20, 25 years later. They had to completely undo the Will and Grace finale because they wanted to do something else with the show when they came back to it. So Community is an interesting one for sure when thinking of like what is the ending to something.
6 seasons in a movie, obviously.
Like you said, not over until the movie, but it also had many potential times that would have been our last time with the characters.
Well, and Community, like obviously I had to do Community as one of my pilots and finales, but we did pilot, and then I was thinking, well, which like quote unquote finale is it? Season 4 finale? Because that was one of the seasons where we thought, is Community coming back after the end of season 4? And the end of season 4 finale, they kind of wrote it to make it seem like Community may not be coming back. So it did have a very like, this is a series finale kind of feel to it. And then I was like, or do we watch season 5 finale? Because again, at the end of season 5, we were like, is Community ever coming back at the end of season 5? And then by the time you get to season 6 and we watch the season 6 finale, it was a good finale for what it was, but it just kind of felt like every other Community episode, because at this point we had already seen 2 other finales. So you're completely right, Carolyn. Like they had so many finales to kind of prepare us for the end of the show that we were all ready for the show to end.
Yeah, Futurama also has that problem. So I have no idea where they're at with their like. We need one of those like website statuses, like Futurama is canceled or uncanceled.
I was so happy to see that we have another fellow Seinfeld fan with us today, and one of those series endings that really struck a chord with people was the Seinfeld finale. And Bethany, I believe that your exact words to us were, "I stand by my assertion that the final episode of Seinfeld was genius and will fight anyone to death who says otherwise." So this is a finale that I remember I've seen pictures of, like they were showing it in Times Square. Like this is one where people got together in bars and actually watched it. So, and it's one that a lot of people still to this day do not like. But Bethany, I want to hear you defend this finale. Why is it such a genius finale?
So Seinfeld had 2 rules going in to the show: no learning and no hugging. And they stuck by those 2 rules throughout the entire series. They did not hug and they did not learn. And to the very end, when they ended the show and they're sitting in the cell and they're ready to go off to prison, all 4 of them did not learn a thing. They ended the show and they didn't learn a single lesson. They weren't sorry for what they did. And I think that just kind of sums up Seinfeld. Was, there was no learning to be had. I think that was kind of the genius behind it, was that, we knew going into the series, they said it many times, it's a show about nothing. And they stuck to that. It was a show about nothing, about 4 people who were just, try to live their day-to-day lives as like irredeemable as they were, and they had nothing to prove to themselves or anyone else, and that's how they ended the show. I mean, come on, like starting the show with the button conversation, ending the show with the button conversation. It's just like the beautiful bookending symmetry of that is just, it's very poetic, and I just loved it. And I know it was critically panned. I think people just weren't ready for it. They weren't ready for an ending where the characters didn't learn anything, where they didn't go off and like buy the house or have the baby or get married. They weren't ready for that kind of, I guess, non-ending, really. And I feel like Seinfeld just really subverted the genre of sitcoms, where sitcoms had the happy ending and everyone learned something and everyone ended happily ever after, and Seinfeld just ended.
Yeah, it's like you think back to like Family Ties, where it's like on a very special episode.
Yeah.
And then everybody has some tragedy and they learn and grow, and like Seinfeld never did any of that.
No, not at all.
It's funny because too, in that final episode, I mean, I think most people have seen it. I think it's one of the most watched TV episodes of all time. But when they're in the airplane and it looks like they're going to crash, and kind of Elaine was kind of hinting to Jerry that like she's always loved him, and they kind of tease, like I think for most audience members, they kind of like tease us with the, oh my God, like, are they finally going to get back together? And yes,
They're
I knew it.
totally overt about it in one of the spots that Geraldo is doing at the courthouse. He's saying that they're going through and they're talking about like the court, and word comes that Jerry and Elaine used to date, and maybe this will rekindle, and could there be wedding bells? Like, they're totally on top of the wish fulfillment piece almost of Jerry, the sitcom in the sitcom, finally getting the go ahead. Jerry and George moving to LA. Like, they're setting it right up and then taking you completely in another direction. It is one of the most certain finales I think there is, for sure. And of the dozen, it was honestly like a dozen different shows that I watched the finales of, and I Seinfeld was the only one that had me laughing and not tearing up. Every other one, I'm not good at goodbyes. The idea of someone saying goodbye, packing up, I'm gonna cry at the drop of a hat for that. Seinfeld was the only one that didn't have me weeping.
It was such a funny episode, and one of the criticisms was that there weren't enough jokes in it,
No.
which I found so strange. Like the fact that, and they still stuck to the formula of Jerry doing stand up
Yeah.
within the episode, because the fact that they ended the episode with him doing stand up in prison and making the joke about cell block D, and the jokes were still, I still found plenty of jokes. There was still lots of laughs. I think at the time people just weren't ready for it. And I think maybe now, if that finale had come out, now that we've had so many like sitcoms that have kind of subverted that genre a little bit, like Community, that plays around with the format, that plays around with the fourth wall so much, I think that finale might be received a little bit better than it was at the time.
Also, just the idea of the parade of witnesses of people they have wronged
Oh, yeah.
is just so smart. And again, it's calling back even internally. It's not just a funny practical thing on its own. It's very much the way the earlier episodes, the pilot, when not the pilot of the show, the episode, the pilot, when they filmed the pilot to Jerry, the sitcom in the sitcom, and they show all these clips of people from their past watching the show in their own houses. The Bubble Boy, the Virgin, Susan at the time, Susan's parents in the courtroom. Like, it's something that's consistent with Seinfeld the show, and is just a smart use of the history of the show as well.
It's such a beautiful tribute to fans too. As a super fan, you get to see all of those fan favorites again. That's such a great. I really love the fact that Larry David, who wasn't a writer in the final season, but then he came back to write that episode. I thought that was a genius way to pay tribute to the fans by bringing back all these fan favorite characters and parading them through the courtroom like that.
Some other TV shows that were mentioned as having maybe disappointing endings were Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life. Tiffany at Riverbend shared with us, there needs to be at least one more episode so that we know what happens. So frustrating. Did not like the cliffhanger that it ended on. Shows include How I Met Your Brother. Bryce, will be going to you for that one. Lost, Heroes, Game of Thrones. What are your thoughts on this, Bryce?
Oh man, the ending to How I Met Your Mother. This is like this to me. That ending kind of inspired this whole idea of this episode. Just thinking about it, the ending of that show is so terrible that I have not been able to go back and watch the show. again.
Yeah.
Like it's in syndication everywhere. You can watch it on Netflix or whatever streaming service it's on. And I like it just left such a bad taste in my mouth. I'm like, I'm done with this show. Will not be in my Seinfeld rotation of shows I will watch for the rest of my life. But to me, I think the reason why it made it such a terrible ending was that, you know, we have like the whole last season, essentially it's like character of Robin and Barney are going to get married. And we finally have Ted, who's kind of been pining over Robin for the whole series. And we have, you know, basically this ridiculous scene where Ted like finally gets over Robin by like letting her go at the beach, and it's like she's like a balloon or something. She like reaches up and she floats off. It's terrible. You should look it up on YouTube. You'll laugh at it. But and then of course the whole story is about like how, you know, How I Met Your Mother. We find out who the mother is and we learn a little bit about her, and spoiler alert, only to have her killed off. And then Ted just ends up marrying Robin anyway. Like why did we have to get to that point? So I thought it was insulting to fans, and you know, it's one thing to kind of kill off the mother. I thought that was a terrible decision, but then to make a big deal out of, you know, Ted finally being over Robin, and then they just end up getting back together. It was just kind of pointless. Like those poor kids having to listen for 9 years that story about their mother and everything. So yeah, that's an ending that kind of bugs me to this day.
But doesn't that borrow from like Caroline's trial uncertainty ending a little bit, where through a certain lens, the story that was being told to the kids is putting Robin on trial? Like, is this a relationship that I should be running to? Is this something worth pursuing? And he's trying to get their buy-in or approval.
I mean, I certainly think that reading is definitely there. I feel like, particularly as Bryce says, in the last season, the show, that's not the show they were making. And this was another series that I did a pilot last episode rewatch of, because I went into it thinking that the last episode really undercut what the show was. I mean, it's right there in the title, How I Met Your Mother, and it not How I Met Your Mother, but I'm actually in love with Robin. Looking back at the pilot, it's the pilot like famously misdirects, because the pilot is all about Ted meeting Robin in a bar, going on this date, thinking she's the one, falling in love with her, setting it up, and then the punchline of the pilot is, and that's how I met your Aunt Robin. And the kids go, what? I thought this was about Mom. And then it's like, well, I'll get to that. And on the one hand, it's a case of when the show tells you what it's about, believe it. But on the other hand, I don't think the show knew what it was about. And I think that it's a victim of how long the series lasted. If it had ended after, say, the first season or two, I think having Robin as that end game relationship made a lot more sense than by watching Ted go through some real Ted and Barney and Robin, like all three of them, going through actual growth and character development only in the last episode to have that pulled out.
Yeah.
Which is one of my thoughts on Gilmore Girl, A Year in the Life as well. I don't know if anyone here watched either Gilmore Girls, which that finale of the original series, it's more eye-rolling to me than problematic, but watching it back is quite interesting. But Gilmore Girls, A Year in the Life got a lot of attention for the finale because this was, again, the creator, and thinking of like Jerry Seinfeld, Larry David being able to say when they were going out and kind of making it their own. Amy Sherman Palladino, the creator of Gilmore Girls, left before that last season of the original series. And she had talked a long time about knowing how the show would end. She had the last 4 words in her mind the whole time. But then she left before the series ended, and it in the remake, the revisiting, the year in the life, she's back. It's all building to this. We get to the end. It's kind of cliffhangery. It's more interesting to me as a concept than an actual ending, because the show ends with Rory telling Lorelai that she is pregnant, and that would have been a very different ending at a lot of other points of the show. To have Rory telling her mom she's pregnant, if it was when she's graduating high school or college or going off in the world, that's one thing. When we get to Rory's in like her mid-30s. This is a different character, a different thing. And it almost felt like shoehorning something in that was no longer part of where the characters were. So I think about like the concept of like what an ending is more than actually being satisfied with Gilmore Girls: A Year in the Life. But that's my take on that, which I went into depth on because I don't have a lot to say about Lost. Does anyone want to take on Lost?
Lost. Oh man. So yeah, I think that this kind of fits well with your like high concept ending that is trying to balance character development and character arcs against like what the show is actually about. And I feel Lost just fell apart at the end spectacularly. And it's similar to Battlestar Galactica in the sense that it's kind of hand-wavy supernatural causes is the reason for everything. But where I lose Lost is that it made the promise of explaining everything away, where each answer would lead inexorably to other questions. But it just felt like by the end, there were too many questions left out there. And by the end of the show, it's just unwieldy, unfocused. And I mean, I love the journey that Lost took me on. This is one of those shows where perhaps it wasn't about the destination in the end, but the journey that we were on together. I used to moonlight on all the fan fiction sites and the wikis to like, oh, did you see that Dharma Initiative symbol in the background, and cross-reference it against all your tables and charts? Like, that part was fun. But then you get to the ending, and I had no idea how I got there. Like, looking back on it, I still only have a vague notion. It's like they just kind of dump out like a box full of parts, and they're asking us to assemble some sort of meaning or understanding from it. And I don't know. Did anyone else stick around for the ending? Like, what kind of sense did you get from it?
I was just going to say, so I did watch Lost, and then I rewatched the pilot and finale. And like rewatching the pilot, it just, every time I've rewatched Lost, the series, since it first aired as well. So I've seen this whole series twice. Every time I watch the pilot, I have so much hope for like this series is going to be so amazing, and like it's so cool, and it's just so great, and there's all these cool things happening, and then by the time I get to the finale, I'm so confused. I'm so lost. I have no idea what's going on. And like, granted, it certainly wasn't helped by the fact that this time I just watched the pilot and then just watched the finale. So I spent the majority of the finale asking my husband, like, so why they're in purgatory? What's going on? Spoiler alert. Like, how, why, who's in the coffin? What's going on? And again, I've seen the entire series multiple times. And I've watched YouTube video breakdowns of the entire series multiple times, and I'm still very confused about a lot of things within the series. So I feel you, Ben, on all of this.
Yeah, and it's like they're two different shows that just happen to have the same cast. That something happens to them hand wavy in the middle. Now the cool part is that one of the showrunners, David Lindelof, would then go on to do another mystery box show called The Leftovers. Have any of you seen that one?
Yes.
No, I've heard of it.
Okay, this is what I want to hear, because Bethany gets it. Bryce will get it. Okay. And this is one of the more recent shows, so I'm not going to try to spoil anything too much. So we'll just start with the premise, which is what would happen if 2% of the population of the planet instantly vanished? And so if the show was written by Lost, they would just keep unpeeling layers and you go down this rabbit hole of like, oh, and then there's a shadowy government organization and they got this machine, but it's built by the scientist and he was dating somebody else. Like, it would be stupid and unwieldy, like Lost. No, that was harsh. But instead, what they do is they focus doggedly on the characters. Like, theories about why this disappearance happened becomes almost like an ongoing running joke in the show, where like you'll have cultists and new religions and scientists who don't know and government agents who don't care, but they just have to deal with like processing like all these death certificates where there's no body. And they just focus on the characters and the impact that the event has and continues to have on the characters. And by the end, it was great because, one, it was consistent with the show. They didn't bother trying to explain like, hey, what happened? And you're kind of left with this life of Pi-ish question at the end where you're like, do you prefer the story with the supernatural explanation or the scientific explanation? Or, and this is probably the closest I'll get to a spoiler alert, it doesn't matter because it's always been about the characters, their relationships, and where they're left in their experience of the world. And their beliefs about the why of the story is what shapes these relationships. And so, yeah, it's really well done. One random commenter that when I was reading up on the ending just to kind of test the which way the wind was blowing on it, one person said it was better than anything written by Shakespeare. So,
wow.
Which I might be inclined to agree. It's a really good show.
It's a beautiful show. Yes, it's definitely, I highly recommend it for sure.
Like The Leftovers, there are some other shows that really nailed their endings, and we got some feedback from staff. So I just want to share a couple comments here. Andrea, who's a materials handling clerk here at EPL. So I love this pick. She goes, I remember watching Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated and absolutely loving it as a young adult. Trust me when I say that this series is not like other Scooby-Doo TV series for the fact that it had a continuous plot, which was really, really good. It was very Nancy Drew feeling with a supernatural element that somehow worked really well together. I cannot tell you how many twists and turns came that I just didn't expect. Yet the ending was so bittersweet because after going through so many intense situations and having so many antagonists, all of a sudden they beat the big supernatural baddie and everything was miraculously fixed except that nobody but the mystery gang remembered what happened in order to get to that point. So I've seen lots of memes from that show. And another one too, and I'll agree with Angelica here. So a former guest, Angelica Thompson, wrote, the most satisfying series ending ever, in my opinion, was 6 Feet Under. Each episode would start with the death of a client of the Fisher family funeral home. But spoiler alert, the finale followed the life of each of the main characters through to their deaths in the most beautiful, heartbreaking, and sometimes a little bit comical way. It was such a perfect ending and left everything completely wrapped up. And I know that recent guest Indy Randawa added that that's actually his favorite finale ever.
Yeah, it's a good one. It was one of the ones that I rewatched for this, and that mix of the uncertainty of Claire Fisher heading off to a new adventure, kind of paired with this overview of where everyone ended up. Just, I think they nailed that balance for sure. Heather at the Riverbend branch added Netflix's German sci-fi thriller series Dark has so many twists and turns. Sometimes creepy, it started out as a murder mystery and becomes a time-traveling, mind-bending, who's who crazy ride. But the ending was beautiful. Perfection, in my opinion. Ben, I think you'd mentioned that you'd seen the show.
Oh, yeah.
Do you agree?
As you may have noticed by now, apparently metaphysical science fiction shows are my jam. I'll resist the urge to rant too much about it, but I'll just say, yes, Heather is absolutely correct. It's a completely bingeable show. If you do watch it, I highly recommend you just Google like Dark Family Tree and just print out a copy of it just to have on the table next to you, because it will not make any sense. so it doesn't really spoil too much, because even looking at it, you still have no idea what's going to happen. But it will help you kind of understand the relationships and how they unfold of the show. Like, it's great aesthetic, and the ending does a perfect job of tying everything up together, which is just so consistent with what the show's about. So very good.
I'm gonna have to check that out for sure.
And so just a quick question for the panel. We've talked a lot about shows with endings, and it just kind of struck me that I think, good or bad, it is nice when something does have an ending. And I just want to give kind of like a quiet shout out to all the shows that never had the dignity of being brought to a close, for good or for bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, the first show I thought of just when you started talking about that is Mindhunter, our friend of the show, John Douglas, on Netflix. We got 2 brilliant seasons of true crime drama, and the series just ended, and we're probably not going to get a 3rd season ever on it. So yeah, like it can definitely, as a fan, be really frustrating when, you know, that stuff happens. And like you said, I mean, even a bad ending is at least better than not having an ending at all.
Yeah, that's what I love about Game of Thrones, because you can take your pick. So,
yeah. I mean, Bethany, you touched on this earlier, but like I did not rewatch the ending to prepare for this episode, but I to this day kind of don't really understand all the hate directed towards the ending. Like, I think it was kind of unfair. You seem to be nodding your head, Bethany.
When I rewatched it, originally I did have a lot of hate towards the ending, but then when I rewatched it, I honestly couldn't remember why I felt so much anger towards it. And I was like, oh yeah, this all makes complete and total sense. Why things have wrapped up this way. So I don't know why. I think Carolyn, you like pointed out maybe somewhat a bit of the crux of it, of like the journey leading up to the finale. And I think maybe the whole last season of Game of Thrones impacts how people feel about the finale. And there were like a lot of people had a lot of issues with the last season. But even the more I think about the last season, the more I think, well, of course things had to end the way they did, and of course things had to go the way they went in the last season. So I'm really struggling to remember why, or really struggling to remember why I was so upset with the finale. I think also I personally put so much pressure on the finale. I wanted it to be so much. There was so much riding on it. And I think that's probably a lot of where it came from for me anyway, was that there was a lot of expectation on it. And maybe, no, definitely it was a little bit unfair to put that much pressure on it.
Yeah, so it's funny. I should have gone back and listened to our Game of Thrones episode of Overdue Finds, because we recorded that just after the series finale and talked a little bit about it. And I think one of the things that I know for a fact that I didn't like kind of leading into the final season was that everything just seemed to be really rushed. Like, it just seemed like, okay, well, we need to get from A to B, and like normally this would take probably half a season, but we have to do that in 2 episodes. And also, it didn't help that, like, if I recall, we had to wait like almost 2 years between seasons, and you know, the book series wasn't finished, so we really didn't have anything to base it off of, like kind of the beginning of the series we did. So yeah, and I think, like Bethany, I think you said it best. I do think that, you know, I think we put a lot of pressure on the show producers to deliver this epic finale. And, you know, if there's something there that we didn't like, then it's, you know, we can't enjoy it. And I think that's wrong for that one. that, I mean, I know I just criticized the ending to How I Met Your Mother and I haven't been able to go back and watch it, but I think, I do think Game of Thrones was probably a little bit more unfairly judged in that aspect.
Yeah. And it's also living in the shadow of its own unfinished literary version. So I think that's kind of a challenge to overcome. So I don't think we'll ever see it. That's my personal bet. But
yeah, I agree.
That's for George R. R. Martin to decide.
Are there other TV shows that you think really had strong finales? We've talked about a few of them through the course of the episode, but other ones that really did well. Ben?
This one's just a quick hit. Adventure Time, Cartoon Network's animated series, ran for a long time. I think it might even be sort of back, but not really back. It's an animated show about a kid going on adventures in what you learn is a post-apocalyptic nuclear wasteland full of mutants that are all like gumball princesses and talking animals, and he's the last human. And the shows are mostly just little quick vignettes, but when you kind of take them together, there is a plot that's kind of that unfolds through this gradual world building. And the showrunners had no idea where they were going as they went. They're just like, okay, yeah, this would be cool if we ran with this. So they'll just do it for run different arcs for like little quick 12 episodes series. But it just ends on a very bittersweet ending. Like I ugly cried at the end of it. And then my 8-year-old watched it, and then he ugly cried, and then we ugly cried together. It was just way more moving than it should have been, given it's just about like this 12-year-old kid just trying to be an awesome dude. And yeah, love it.
Nice.
Bethany?
I really liked the finale for Silicon Valley. I don't know if anyone's watched that show. I feel like it was really the only way to end that show. It was kind of another one of those shows where I think the characters were never really meant to kind of like secure that final goal, and they were never really meant to like go off into the sunset and have the happy ending of like building the new internet with Pied Piper. And with Silicon Valley, I think the way they ended it was the best way to do that. A final feeling to like all the characters' story arc, but still remain true to the whole kind of concept of them constantly trying to develop this new internet, but always coming up against issue or obstacle after obstacle, building it. Also, the whole thing tying it back to the rats at the end, and literally it being Pied Piper at the end, I thought was a genius way to end the show. So if you watch Silicon Valley, that's a treat.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that finale. I think I was watching that last season live when it actually aired, and yeah, it's a brilliant series finale. It actually kind of reminded me of two other series finales, and that's Parks and Recreation and Veep. So both kind of having to do with politics. And what I love about both of these endings is like just like Silicon Valley, we stay true to our true to the characters and the show. And what I love too is we get to see kind of what happens to these characters in the future. Nobody moves away, and then we just have to guess what happens to them. We know exactly what happens to all these characters after the final episode. And in the case of Veep, I actually liked Veep's a little bit better, just because it's such a perfectly dark ending that fits with the overall theme of the show, and Selena Myers just constantly being overlooked and by somebody else. So and yeah, if you haven't watched Veep, please go watch that. It's a brilliant political satire. Caroline, how about you?
Star Trek The Next Generation came up earlier. It's definitely one of my favorites. I am a sucker for that final shot where the main cast is sitting around playing poker and the sky's the limit. I mean, it's corny and it's perfect and it's wonderful. I also really liked the ending to the show Dinosaurs. So Dinosaurs was the Jim Henson creation show that was like this family of dinosaurs. Baby Sinclair was the breakout star of the
Not the
show.
mama.
Not the
Yeah.
mama. I'm the baby. Gotta love me.
It was hilarious in 91. Like,
Yeah.
nothing was funnier than that.
Voiced by the same person who did Elmo. So when you're going back and watching Dinosaurs, it sounds a lot like Elmo. Anyway, the last episode is actually the family is waiting for the return of this beetle, and the beetle comes the same time every year, like clockwork, except this year. And they realize, wait, what's going on? Finally, a beetle shows up, says, I got separated from the group. I got to go to this swamp to mate, and then the babies will eat these poppies, and it'll be great. So they go to the swamp. The swamp has been paved over with a wax fruit factory, and the wax fruit factory is representative of all of this amazing technology. So now the beetles aren't making baby beetles to eat the poppies. So the corporation then says, okay, well, we'll just use this herbicide. And so they use that to kill the poppies. They actually end up killing all the vegetation on Earth. There are a few more iterations to try to fix everything, and then all of a sudden, before you know it, they are in an ice age, and it's at the end for dinosaurs. And it's tonally kind of different. So it shows that you can take a bit of a different approach to it while still being this consistent. It was a total swerve for the show. Not super popular. I don't think a lot of people wanted the dinosaurs to die out. But I mean, again, spoiler alert.
Caroline, I had that on my list as one of the worst TV endings. I remember watching that, and I remember because the last line in that show, correct me if I'm wrong, I imagine this is probably, you just watched this.
Yeah.
But isn't the last line of the series, they're all huddled around the TV knowing that they're essentially doomed, and they're all in their winter gear and everything, and then the baby says, doesn't he say something like, Daddy, I'm cold, or something along those lines? And that's the last line of the whole series is we know this family we've come to love is just, they're gonna die.
It's not subtle. It's not subtle.
Oh, no, not at all. It's a little bit preachy, but
This was also the era of Captain Planet.
Yeah, 100% was. Yeah.
Which I still do not understand why Captain Planet has not had a reboot in this day and age. I just do not understand that. But
because the bad guys
dinosaurs.
won.
Yeah.
I think that's on there. I also had on my list Survivor season 1. The way that it really created a lot of what would come later in competitive reality shows. It aired, I think the first season of Survivor was 2000. And, this idea of the jury speech, the bitter vote, watching it, I remember going oh, he can't possibly win, but not realizing the contestants hadn't seen everything we had seen at home, and just the editing on it. Survivor season 1, it set the template, I think, for a lot that would come later. Bryce, before I get you to set up what we are talking about on our next episode, I do want to give a shout out. We almost got all the way through without mentioning MASH, which was not a TV show that I ever really watched. But the 2.5-hour TV movie finale, which aired February 28th, 1983, had over 100 million viewers watching it, and remains the most watched television series episode of all time. So that was their finale episode, and we could not do this whole show without mentioning MASH.
Talking about legendary TV series, obviously MASH and just that finale, and like just, I mean, 100 million people, like I don't remember what that percentage of TVs were, but it was like 80 or 90% of all TVs like were watching that. And that's, I mean, we'll never see anything like that ever again.
Yeah. So before we get to the roundtable questions, can you share with listeners what we'll be talking about on our next episode coming out on Friday, June 17th?
Yeah, so on Overdue Finds, we love talking about our book to film adaptations. And when you're talking about the best ones of all time, one of those titles that always comes up in conversation is Stand By Me, which is based on the Stephen King novella, The Body. So on our next episode, we're going to be chatting all about the 1986 film and some of our favorite Stephen King tales. So Caroline, I'm really looking forward to this one. I've talked about my love of Stephen King before on the show. And also too, I'm not sure if it'll be posted hopefully by the time this episode comes out, but for our adult summer reading club this year, we're kicking it off by actually showing Stand By Me at the Stanley A. Milner Library on Friday, June the 24th. So you can listen to the podcast, then go watch the movie with us. So it'll be a good one.
Sounds good. So our roundtable questions. The first one, if you could resolve any pop culture cliffhanger, which one would you choose? Bethany?
This is, I don't know if it's really considered a cliffhanger, but one of my other favorite series was the 2015 Muppets TV show, but it got canceled after one season, and it got canceled on the final episode of like Kermit and Miss Piggy like maybe getting back together at the end of the series or the in the finale. I would like to resolve that.
Was that the one where it was like kind of like a behind the scenes at like a talk show?
Yeah, it was stylized the same as The Office, like with the
Yes.
talking heads and everything. It was hilarious. I definitely recommend, if you're a Muppets fan, definitely recommend it. It was so funny.
Yeah, it's a really fun Hollywood satire as well.
Ben, how about you?
I wake up every morning and I go to the internet to see if Our Flag Means Death has been renewed yet. And I do HBO executives listen to this podcast? I'm going to assume they do. Just come on, HBO. Do the right thing.
If they're not listening, look, we have given so many ideas away for free on this podcast.
Yeah.
They should.
We don't ask for payment. A little thank you might be nice, but executives at Netflix and HBO, they're missing out.
That means that Bryce.
This is a weird one, but I'm going with Alf. So Alf also has one of those weird like dinosaur type endings that's like kind of more depressing than it really needs to be. Basically, it looks like Alf is being caught by the US government after he's trying to get back to Melmac. He's arranged for the ship to come pick him up. The ship gets spooked and they fly off, and Alf is like stuck. Unfortunately, the feds are on his tail. So the last thing we see of lovable Alf is him essentially being taken into custody by these like secret government agents. So we don't know. Does Alf help us connect with other alien life, or to put it darkly, do they do horrible experiments on Alf? We don't know. So I'd like to find out that Alf was actually okay and he was chumming it up with the US government. So that's mine. Caroline, how about you?
The original Twin Peaks finale, the television series, with the Dale Cooper having emerged, but is it really him? I'm throwing out the revisited series from a couple years ago, mainly because I did not understand it. But going back and doing a continuation in the early 90s with the cast and they were all still alive, that's what I would use my magical powers on. Yeah, I guess we had magical powers in this question. Makes sense.
I think you
though.
need magical powers for any David Lynch work.
Yeah.
So you
Yeah.
just do a whole episode on David Lynch endings. Maybe a season.
Oh, yeah. Okay, second roundtable question. If you had to share a jail cell with the main cast of one TV show, like in the Seinfeld finale, which would you choose, Ben?
Is it cheating if I use Our Flag Means Death twice?
No.
Okay, then them. They just seem so lovely and delightful and fun.
Okay. Bethany?
It would have to be Community, Pierce and all. I happen to love Pierce, Chevy Chase. I know he's, you either love him or you hate him. Yeah, I think Pierce is a hilarious character in Community, and I think it would be so much fun to hang out with the whole Community gang in the jail cell.
Community always strong with a bottle episode. So
Exactly.
having a one setup, you're good.
It's perfect. Everyone would know exactly how to handle that situation.
Bryce?
So mine's kind of weird. I need to incorporate, since we're using magical powers apparently on these questions. So my cast is animated. So kind of almost going like the Chippendale Rescue Rangers route with the new movie, which by the way is surprisingly good. You should
so
watch
good.
it.
I have so many thoughts.
Yeah.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for our Chippendale Rescue Ranger episode. But mine would be the cast of King of the Hill. So no, I don't find anybody in that kind of the four kind of main characters like Hank, Dale, Boomhauer, and Bill to be overly annoying or anything. So I love rewatching that show. And I think Hank and the guys would love the challenge of kind of trying to make that cell to be more comfortable and easier to live in. So Arlen's Finest is my pick.
Nice.
Caroline, how about you?
I'm jetting over to Miami with the Golden Girls. We know from the episode where they were mistaken for prostitutes and put in jail that they know how to handle themselves. So I think I could fit in quite nicely with them in a jail cell.
I like how you already have a backstory as to why you're all in jail.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you both so much for joining us today. I have had so much fun talking about all of these finales, and I have so much more television that I cannot wait to watch. Is there anything coming up that you would like to let listeners know about? Ben?
Yeah, just keeping it strictly on entertainment. White Mud Crossing branch, if you're not aware, has a full-size theater that every Sunday we show movies that anybody can come and view for free, family movies. On June 12th, we're showing Pixar's Onward, which is a touching homage to Dungeons & Dragons, featuring a reanimated set of ghostly dad pants. It's super weird, but it works like most Pixar movies. Yeah, check it out.
Oh, and Bethany, is there anything you'd like listeners to know about?
Yeah, I just wanted to plug a really cool resource in our collection that I think would be really great to help with that, help prevent the summer slide. It's called Mazam. It's a musical education resource. It's for elementary kids, and it's a game-based resource. So it exposes young kids to music, classical music, through playing games. It's really fun. It has lots of fun characters, and it's Canadian built, Canadian created in Montreal. So yeah, check out Mazam.
Cool. We hope you've enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so, we encourage you to subscribe so that you get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you like the show, tell a friend about us.
Yeah, and don't forget that this isn't the end. We're going to have a link to everything that we talked about in today's show notes. We love to hear from our listeners. We shared that lovely email earlier in the show. So yeah, shoot us a note on, you can tag us on Twitter at epl.ca and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. You can also email us at podcast@epl.ca and share your picks with us for the best and worst endings. So I imagine, Caroline, in the future, we will be doing a best and worst endings for TV series and books. So if you have any picks for those upcoming episodes,
For movies.
Movies,
If you want to know about TV series,
yes, you just
rewind to the beginning.
Yes, movies and books. Please let us know. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.